Hey Music City, Joe Crosby here. I want to thank everyone for listening to the podcast, sharing with a friend, or following us on social media. If you have an idea for a new episode or know of a nonprofit leader who would be a great interview, please reach out and let us know. Be sure to visit the website to learn more about today's episode or any of the previous episodes at musiccitygiving.co. And I would also be extremely grateful if you would like and subscribe the podcast wherever you listen. Like most people in our city, my family has always had plenty to eat, and even in excess. We have a fully stocked pantry, we have 3 meals a day. We never have to worry about where our next meal is coming from. But that's not the case for many people in our city. Nearly 1 in 7 Nashvillians don't have access to the food that they want or need. On today's episode, I speak with Elizabeth Langgle-Martin, the Community Engagement Manager at the Nashville Food Project. Their mission is to bring people together to grow, cook, and share nourishing food, with the goals of cultivating community and alleviating hunger in our city. Not only do we talk about access to quality food, but we dive deep into food and social justice. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to Music City Giving, a show about the unsung leaders and volunteers behind Nashville's nonprofits, foundations, and charitable organizations. I'm Joe Crosby, and on today's show, Elizabeth Langlle-Martin, Community Engagement Manager at the Nashville Food Project.
So my name is Elizabeth Langlle-Martin. I've been with the Food Project for just over 3 years, and my role is called the Community Engagement Manager. And so I think that role can look different for different organizations, but what it means for me is that I steward a lot of our volunteer and intern programs. I respond to lots of requests for tours or speaking engagements or panels. And then I also organize community events that are related to food justice and kind of community learning about issues of food justice and inequality. I support our staff team as we seek to prioritize and move forward strategic priorities related to equity and inclusion. And then I also help our teams facilitate community listening to inform our programming and kind of have conversations with new potential partners and kind of establish those relationships when we're building relationships with new partners or individuals. And so the Nashville Food Project has been around for about 10 years, but our mission and our vision has evolved along that time. We kind of envision this, we want to community food security, which is this idea that everyone has access to the food that they want and need through a just and sustainable food system. And that's kind of a long sentence, but we want folks to be able to access the food that they want and need without a lot of barriers and in a way that's culturally appropriate, in a way that is meaningful to their individual situations. And we want to do that in a way that's caring for the earth and caring for all the people who are involved in the food system. Our projects are kind of centered in 3 different areas. We say grow, cook, and share. So we have an extensive urban agricultural program. We have 3 urban agricultural sites. And in those sites, we support community gardeners who have identified that they have some barrier to accessing fresh food, and they want to grow their own food as a way to push back against that. And they need access to land, and some of them need support in learning how to grow their own food. Some of them know and have vast agricultural experience and just need the infrastructure of a space with irrigation. And then some folks are kind of starting from scratch and want to learn from step 1 how to grow their own food. And then they choose what to grow, and then they bring that home to supplement their family's grocery budget. And so we work with a lot of families in North Nashville and through our community farm at Mill Ridge in Antioch to support community gardeners. We also have a program called Growing Together, which is an agricultural program that supports, last year it was 8 farmers who originally entered the U.S. as refugees from Burma and Bhutan. And they came to our country with a lot of incredible agricultural skill and wanted to grow for market. So they want to be able to grow and sell to generate funds to support their families. And so we lease land and share that with them. And then we also provide marketing support to help them manage a CSA and to help them find different marketing outlets for the produce that they're that they're growing so they can sell it and meet their income goals. And one of the cool kind of offshoots of that program is that kind of land access allows people to grow food that might be hard to access in like in Kroger's or in Walmart. There's some items that are of cultural significance that are important to recipes that have been passed down from family member to family member. And in an American grocery store, it's hard to find those, and they're considered like a specialty item. And so being able to kind of have a lot of autonomy over what you grow and having those ingredients available for your family is kind of a powerful thing. We also facilitate 2 commercial kitchens in the nation's neighborhood. And out of those commercial kitchens, we put out about over 200,000 meals a year. And all of those are served in partnership with other local poverty interrupting work. So basically, we make from scratch meals. Those are then distributed to our partner nonprofits or grassroots organizing efforts. And they serve those meals alongside their programming to folks that they're working with. And so that allows us to provide really high quality food and kind of do what we do best, which is focusing on the food aspect, while supporting this other work that's going on with folks who are deeply invested in different communities and different justice efforts. And as part of that meals program, we do a lot of food recovery as well. And so we build relationships with the farms and grocery stores and restaurants to help them anticipate when they're going to have waste. And we intercept those ingredients while they're still good and usable. And they share those with our programs, and we're able to quickly incorporate those into meals that are going out to make sure that food that's already in our community is like being leveraged to meet the needs of the folks who are in this area, because that food's already here. And so we make a big effort to get it into the hands and into the meals of folks who are going without.
Got it. I mean, so hearing you say that is a lot of stuff. That is a lot of stuff that y'all are doing. I mean, it covers the gamut of, I mean, every part of food. It sounds like, from just from growing all the way to the legal side of things, of advocacy and that kind of stuff. So, knowing that you have your hands in every part of this process, and seeing every part of this process, we know, food is kind of a basic need. Everybody needs food, obviously, but why, in this day and age, why are these, why is there still food shortages? Why is there still lack of quality food? Especially in a place like Nashville. I mean, yes, there are underserved people here, there are underprivileged, but we're a pretty wealthy area overall. What is the general idea behind why is there still food shortages?
Yeah, and I think that can be, I'm going to share with you my viewpoint. I think that can be a kind of loaded question.
Sure.
And depending on who you ask, it's going to be a vastly different answer. And maybe multiple of those are all correct, because it's a really nuanced thing. I think an important thing to know is that there's not actually a food shortage, in a sense that as a nation, 40% of all the food that we produce ends up in the landfill. And so there is actually an excess of food. However, that food is not being used and distributed to make to meet the needs of folks who are going without, because we also still have incredibly high levels of food insecurity. And so I think that our society, and this is my opinion, is that our society has built so much. We've bought into this idea of like this bootstrap fallacy. So because we are very committed to this idea that people need to rise themselves up or pull themselves up by their bootstraps, we don't see food as a human right. And so in all these different tensions and conversations, food gets weaponized. And if food isn't a human right, then it means that people have to be desperate to constantly work to obtain this like very basic thing that we all need. And that means that people are more willing to take really low paying jobs and kind of prop up these systems of inequality that keep poor people poor and make rich people richer. And so I think it's I think it's a really important conversation that there isn't necessarily a shortage of food. And so we have to look at the other reasons. So if there's enough food for everyone, why, I think you're asking a good question, why are people still hungry?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that food is weaponized in our communities. It's not seen as a human right. And if we start looking at food as a human right, a basic that every human being needs and deserves, then that changes the conversation, and that shifts the way that we view how we're getting food to folks, and how we're prioritizing that as a community.
Yeah. You saying that's a loaded question. It was a loaded question. There is no shortage. That's, yeah. I don't even have a response for that. That was a good answer. That was a very good answer. So,
which not everyone might feel that way, but I think that when we look at that juxtaposition of the rate of folks who don't know where their next meal is coming from, juxtaposed with this excess that we're like, we can't even keep enough landfills to host all of the food waste, then we know there's got to be other things going on, because it's not a scarcity issue.
Absolutely.
Which I think a lot of us have been trained to think it is.
Mm-hmm.
And when we feel like something's a really scarce resource, we get really competitive over it. And we think, well, like that person can't have it for free because I'm not getting it for free. And it's like very fear-based. But when we recognize that there's way more food than enough, that kind of changes the conversation.
Absolutely. And then taking that almost a step further, I guess the next thing would be, excess. You just on excess. We're in COVID right now. We're dealing with a pandemic, and we saw food and we saw toilet paper and we saw all this stuff fly off the shelves because there was a fear of a lack of those
Mm-hmm.
items. So, I mean, that goes back to food. What about COVID? How has that affected your the Nashville Food Project, and then along the same lines, how has that affected access to food in the community?
That's a great question. I mean, I think COVID in general has deepened all of the inequalities and all of the gaps that are in our system of how we care for each other. COVID's just kind of exposed that even more vividly. So I'm not sure that it's broken anything that wasn't already broken, but it's definitely highlighted the spaces where our kind of systems of care are brittle. I think one of the hard parts is a lot of times when folks are trying to access an emergency food resource, those things happen in communal settings. And so, I mean, if you think of folks without housing, a lot of times folks without housing rely on communal meal sites at churches or community centers or things like that. And COVID changes the way that we're able to distribute food safely. And so for the Food Project, what that's had to look like is a lot of the organizations we partner with are still creatively finding ways to care for the folks they work with. But it has to look a lot different than coming to a classroom or meeting at a meeting place of faith or things like that. And so we've had to shift from, usually our meals are made kind of more in bulk and served alongside communal programming, but we've had to shift and do individually portioned meals that can be reheated, or family size meals that can be distributed for a family to serve themselves at home or things like that. And so we've had to really kind of tie in even more closely with our partners and figure out, okay, how do we prepare this food in a way that it can still be distributed and it's addressing the current barriers that are facing us due to COVID-19. I think as at a wider level, we have a food safety net, which is like SNAP or food stamps or, emergency resource centers and things like that. We have a very overburdened and under-resourced food safety net. And the Tennessee Justice Center does a lot of incredible work around advocacy and policy related to that. And they're really the experts in that area. But this overburdened, under-resourced safety net is now being accessed by more people than ever. Lots of folks who have never struggled before are now trying to navigate this system. And if there's a whole bunch of new folks who are navigating the system for the first time, that means the folks who are already relying on the system or like needing to access that resource are kind of getting even more buried. And so we have, it's just kind of continuing to unveil the problematic elements of how people can access emergency support in our community, because more folks are needing it now more than ever. And I also think it just really points to how we have so much to learn about the people that we put in power and the people that we vote into all the different offices, local, state, federal, like how essential that is that we know how they handle things like emergency food resources, like pandemic EBT and things like that. Stuff that maybe we haven't individually had to think about, but when it comes to situations like this, it really creates a narrative for the health of our community as a whole. And so I think it's really challenged me to dig more into that and to understand all of those players, and maybe these pieces of the food system and the emergency food system that I haven't had to interact with in a lot of ways, but want to make informed decisions moving forward. And so I think there's a whole bunch of different levels to that question about how COVID affects. But those are just a few of them that we've kind of seen highlighted pretty vividly.
Sure. And then, moving next towards food quality, there's a lot of organizations, they're stocking pantries, they're getting canned food, they're non-perishable items, that kind of thing, which is vital to feeding people. But Nashville Food Project, it goes a step further and looking more towards quality food, nourishing food, with an emphasis on those things. So, why does Nashville Food Project, why do y'all take that next step and go, the emphasis in that is on that quality, nourishing food?
Yeah, I think it comes back to that idea that there is enough. A lot of times food that's served in spaces where folks are already feeling vulnerable and already seeking out additional assistance, it can be really low quality, cheap, high carb, high calorie food. And there's a role for that in a sense that fills bellies quickly and it keeps you going for another day. And I don't want to disparage that at all.
Sure.
Has a role. However, as an organization, and if we're really looking at how we want our food system to operate and what we really want the quality of care to be for people who are feeling vulnerable in our society, we want them to have the access to the same kind of nutrition that will allow them to kind of maintain a healthy lifestyle that feels good and feels life-giving to them. And if folks are always only able to access really low quality food, that's going to create and impact other elements of their life, such as health and focus. And I also just think there's like this inherent value when we're served or shared food that's really high quality. It says something about the value that's held for us.
Sure. And so how do we go about reteaching, retraining people to kind of look at quality food as the priority, not just grab and go, but and it sounds like education is a big portion of what you do, but so how what is that next step of reteaching and retraining people?
Yes, I think that my answer to this question might be a little different in a sense that I don't think that it's our role to decide for families and individuals who have a very different context or who might have a very different context what healthy food looks like in their context. One of the things that I kind of try to abide by, someone said to me in school once, and it's really stuck with me, is that people are experts of their own experience. And so I don't know in my context what healthy food looks like necessarily for another family who has other barriers and other situations than I do. And so I think our role is to make sure that we reduce barriers to there being a variety of options available. And so that way families can choose for themselves what is the best fit for their diet, for their culture, for the amount of time that they have to prepare food. And that might look vastly different. And so I think when a lot of times when folks think about healthy food, they have a very specific idea of what that looks like. And I think we want to make sure that people have access to real whole foods in a variety of different ways that meet their needs as a family.
So I guess moving more towards the growing, the cooking, educating people on the growing side of things, and then going into the cooking side. What are some of these skills, either social, physical, emotional, that people learn from actually growing their own food?
Yeah, I loved this question. I mean, I think so many things. Right now, I learn a lot through parenting my 2-year-old. And so as I've started to, as in the last, 2 years of her life, as I've been responsible for introducing food to her in a new way, it's had me think a lot about this critically. And I follow a children's nutritionist who just is an incredible resource. And she talks about that kids need to have low access pressure to an item, a new food item, up to 200 times before they feel comfortable with it. And so when you think about what the implications of that for families with limited resources, very few families with limited resources can afford to offer a child a new food 200 different times, knowing that they might say no to it 200 times. And so, but she focuses a lot on exposure, like cultivating like a really holistic relationship with food. And I think that cooking and growing for kids and for all of us, it changes the relationship because it like expands our exposure. It's a different experience when we see something start from a seed, when we watch it grow on a plant, where we bring it into the kitchen, where we're slicing it ourselves. It changes the way that we view each item and kind of expands that exposure, which kind of increases the ability or the potential that we're going to look at that item and see it as something we want to be a part of our meal. In our own kitchens, I think that we work really hard to cook through a low waste lens. So really trying to come up with a plan for as much of a usable product or a usable ingredient that we can. At TNFP is the first place that I've ever learned to make carrot top pesto. And like, there's a lot of things where things that I was like tossing or composting can be used to make really incredible recipes, but I just wasn't familiar with that piece of the fruit or the vegetable. And so I didn't know, that I wasn't getting, the full experience from that product. And that helps reduce waste in my own kitchen. And that also expands the value of an item. So like if I'm buying a carrot with tops on it, to know that I can not only use the flesh of the carrot, the orange part, but also can do a whole nother recipe with the tops, kind of changes the amount of food I can produce from that item and reduce the waste. And so kind of learning in our kitchens, I think a lot of people start to think through that lens, and that changes the way that they cook at home, and changes the conversations about how we can utilize the resources and the food that we do have. And then I think just there's something healing about a relationship with the earth. Our society, for better or for worse, views the earth a lot of times as a commodity. It's something to be used, it's something to be purchased. But when you're growing your own food in a sustainable way, it becomes like a symbiotic relationship, where you're investing in this patch of earth and this soil health and this little square of land, and you're cultivating it and caring for it, and it in return can produce and care for you. And I think that shifts the way we see land and soil and space, and kind of can change our relationship with our environment. So I think that's really powerful as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And growing a pepper or some basil in a pot is one of the most like exciting things that I do.
Exactly.
It's just like you see it grow and then you get to eat it, and it's really cool. So who talking about the actual kitchens, who's actually doing the training on cooking and things at your kitchens?
Yeah, so we have an incredible lead chef. Her name is Bianca Morton, and she came out of corporate culinary world, and brings to us in a lot of incredible culinary experience. And then we have just a team of folks on our meals team who, the work that we do in our kitchens is kind of nuanced, because unlike a commercial kitchen that's producing for a restaurant or things like that, we're working with recovered and donated food. So you might have to change recipes or shift directions at a moment's notice. We're working alongside volunteers that have a whole range of kitchen abilities. And we're also, as we're chopping and cooking and heating, we're also trying to talk about the mission of our work and where the food is going and why we believe food justice is, racial justice. And so our kitchens are a really unique space. And so they're led by our chef director, Bianca. But we have a whole team of people who are kind of passionate about all these different components that go into making these meals, which makes it kind of a unique environment.
Sure. Kind of going back to, I guess this would be more personal to you, and or maybe it's you, if you're speaking to someone who's looking to get involved. But what is it about the community, or I'm sorry, the Nashville Food Project that kind of drew you in?
Oh yeah, I mean, this is a great question. I love hearing these stories from each of our team members, each of our volunteers. I actually was working for multiple years as a homeless outreach worker here in Nashville. And so I would journey with folks who were living on the streets and work towards sustainable housing options. Mm-hmm. And also a lot of what that was is just helping folks make sure day to day that they could get their basic needs met. And just kind of recognizing the lack of quality food in those spaces was pretty glaring. I had a gentleman I worked with who I adore named Reno. And I have his blessing to share a story, but he had a lot of really severe health issues. And so he would call me when he would get admitted to the hospital, and I would go be there with him. And every time we were discharged, or he was discharged, they would give these really specific dietary needs. But this gentleman was living on the streets and was relying on communal meals to meet his needs. And a lot of those were a lot of the offerings at those spaces were in direct opposition to what the doctors were telling him his body needed. And so this almost devastatingly impossible situation he was in, that like, these are the things you need to do to stop being hospitalized, is have this really specific, really hard to obtain diet, but these are the foods that are available for you in your situation, was just really devastating. And I think thankfully we were able to move Reno into his own apartment, and he was there for about 4 months before he passed away. And I think that his body just couldn't recover from years of, living in spaces that were exposed to the elements and not having access to the food that his body needed with his unique medical conditions and things like that. And while my relationship with him was like one of the most life-giving experiences, I think it's always broken my heart that he couldn't, that there's this essential element, this high quality of food that just wasn't available. And so kind of shifted the way I see community care and see the need for high quality food as a matter of justice and as a matter of equity and value for people who are struggling. And so that organization that I worked with was a partner with the Nashville Food Project. The Nashville Food Project prepared and shared meals for our overnight shelters and our cold winter shelters. And so when I was looking to make a change and wanting to get into a different kind of aspect of justice work, I really wanted to explore how food can be leveraged and all the ways that food touches other systemic inequalities. And that's how I ended up here.
Gotcha. And what was the previous organization you were with?
Open Table Nashville.
Oh, Open Table. Okay. Yeah. So on that point, actually, so knowing that, there's a large portion of this is, it's related to social justice, and that's a lot of organizations around Nashville. So, what other partner organizations are there that kind of work alongside Nashville Food Project?
Oh yeah, we have so many. So our meals last year in 2020, which obviously just came to a close, our meals were served alongside partners at 77 different meal sites.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and so it kind of has ebbed and flowed over 2020 because there were so many different program closures and reopenings and things like that. But our meals are served alongside a vast different types of programming. And we partner with the YWCA, which is a family violence emergency shelter. We partner with the YMCA's after school programs. We've partnered with organizations like more grassroots efforts like Workers' Dignity, Gideon's Army, TIRRC. We have an upcoming relationship with TIRRC. We've worked with different residential facilities. and see more like emergency shelters. We've worked with GED classes and skills training. We currently are working with the Homeless Impact Division to get individually portioned meals to outreach workers who are working with folks on the street during this time that there's less communal meals available. Kind of a whole host of things. We work with a couple different Meals on Wheels efforts. So we cook and portion the meals, and then their teams and volunteers distribute them to houses of elder adults who are homebound. So all different kinds of programming that's happening in our city. A lot of times for either children or elder adults. When we look at food insecurity numbers, those tend to be super concentrated, more so than we see that concentration more so for children and elder adults. And so a lot of the efforts that we're partnering with serve those two populations of people, but we kind of have a little bit of everything. All sorts of different efforts that our meals are served alongside.
Sure. So, looking at, volunteering and, some people can volunteer their time, others can give financially, some can do both. How can people get in contact? How can people support the Nashville Food Project, volunteer, donate?
Yeah, absolutely. Sadly, right now, because of COVID, our volunteer program is temporarily suspended. We've worked really hard during this time to keep our kitchens and our garden spaces safe and up and operating, which has meant that we've had to minimize the number of bodies that we can have in those spaces. A lot of our team, like myself, that does work that's not in the garden or in the kitchen, is still working remotely. And so at this moment, we don't have volunteer opportunities available, but traditionally we have some robust roles. We have folks that help with prepping ingredients. We have folks that do batch cooking. We have folks that work on special projects in our garden. So if people want to follow us on Instagram or Facebook, we keep people in the loop there. They can also go to our website and sign up for our email list. And then folks are always welcome to reach out to me. It's just Elizabeth at the NashvilleFoodProject.org. Because we do have a really incredible, robust volunteer community. However, right now, those opportunities are limited due to the current pandemic. We're always, of course, like with most work, we always welcome financial donations, whether it's one-time gift or a recurring gift. Some of our most faithful donors, are just giving small amounts monthly, and then we have some really incredible larger donors as well. And then also what a lot of folks tend to do is do in-kind donations, which is a big thing for us. And so if you're at the grocery store, you're welcome to pick up a couple extra things of olive oil or whole wheat pasta. And those are staples that our kitchen is always using. And so those kinds of in-kind donations can really make our budget stretch. So there's lots of ways to get involved. And I also think just kind of tuning into, we try to do a lot of storytelling and sharing pictures from our gardens and our kitchens and recipes and stories about the organizations that our food is going to support and things like that. And so I'm just kind of tuning into those stories and sharing them with friends and family can kind of continually cultivate the conversation about food inequities and the work that's going on in our city.